The Boston area woke up today to a manhunt, an area-wide shutdown of stores and public services, and citizens asked by their governor to stay home. Here now with the latest on the developments in the Boston Marathon bombings. Kamran Bokhari, he is Vice President of Middle Eastern and South Asian Affairs with the global intelligence company Stratfor. And Kamran, as always, we're happy to have you back here in our studio.
Thank you.
Although I would say I wish it were under better circumstances. What I want to do just before we start our conversation is just, Dan Dunsky, our executive producer, and I were chatting earlier today, and it's probably worth just setting this up a bit before we start. What we don't know is why these two suspects, who are alleged to have set these bombs. We don't know if they were influenced by the Chechen wars of the 1990s and 2000s. We don't know whether they were influenced by their Muslim faith. We don't know that. Nevertheless, we know that they are Muslims, and we know that we have seen a great deal of Muslim terrorism over the last decades. So in other words, this is an angle we need to explore. We also know that a number of Chechens have adopted a kind of a jihadist pose and have taken up arms in Afghanistan and Syria and elsewhere, and therefore we need to explore that as well. So, having put all of that on the table, let's start with this. After this happened, people understandably made a mental checklist of who possibly could be responsible for this and why. And I'm wondering where on your mental checklist Chechnya showed up.
Chechnya showed up pretty much when, this question of their ethnicities and their origins came to light in the open sources.
But before that?
But before that, there was this question. These guys don't look like your typical jihadists who are either of, Middle Eastern Arab origin or South Asian, AfPak, or, Bangladeshi origin that we've seen in the past. So that's where we were. But the bigger question here is not origin as much as, whether they are linked organizationally to anything international.
Is there anything you've heard so far that would help you answer that question?
We're hearing everything right now, which makes it even more confusing as to what is the reality of their affiliation. But what we have seen is growing evidence that these are likely self-motivated grassroots jihadist types. But then again, I'm throwing these terms out very loosely because we don't really have anything concrete to go by.
So you can't categorically say that they're not affiliated with something else?
We cannot rule that out. We cannot make that claim. So we're in a gray zone because we're at a point in time where the full picture, or at least a good part of that picture, is not apparent to us.
The explosives that they used, we heard the expression IED used a lot, improvised explosive device, but we're told it was a pressure cooker type of bomb that was used at the marathon. What is that?
That is a type of IED that some of the people in the counterterrorism industry, crudely describe it as something that you can build in your mom's kitchen.
Because the ingredients would be what?
The ingredients are your normal explosive devices, fertilizers and stuff like that. It doesn't take much to get ball bearings, razors, and other things that can, maim and wound people. If you have, a little bit of expertise, tradecraft, then you can actually put together a device if you have the requisite ingredients. Again, we've seen a huge variety in tradecraft skills from what we at Stratfor call Kramer jihadists.
Kramer?
Kramer as in from Seinfeld.
And so it's not a compliment?
It's not a compliment. It's people who are really novices, amateurs, to the point where their devices don't work, as we saw, thankfully, in the case of the New York bomber, the individual who wanted to create an explosion near Times Square, the Pakistani guy. And so you have a lot of zeal, adrenaline, motivation, intent, but your capability is not at a scale where you can actually do damage. Now, in this case, we have a situation where these two individuals were able to pull off an explosion, and two of them. And we don't know, their further intent. What did they intend to do if they were not caught? And one is still on the loose, so we really don't know. And are they just two of them? Are there more people behind them? And are they local, or do they have tentacles somewhere else? So these are all the unanswered questions that we are struggling with at this point.
Well, we know they have tentacles, believe it or not, to Toronto, right? They have an aunt who lives here in Toronto who was on television most of the afternoon giving a impromptu news conference. But as you look at what you know about the facts so far as we understand them, how organized does this whole thing look?
Again, we're going to have to do it on a sliding scale. This is definitely far more organized and a display of skill set than the Times Square bomber. It's much better than Richard Reed, the shoe bomber from right after 9/11, and even far better than the person who tried to do the Christmas Day bombing with the underwear bomb and all that. But again, it's not what we call, the A team of Al-Qaeda or even the B team. We don't even know if this is Al-Qaeda or not. What we do know is these people recently came from, overseas. They have legal permanent residence in the United States. The Kyrgyz government has said that they held Kyrgyz nationality when they got their permanent residence. So they held Kyrgyz passports, which is a long way from Chechnya. Mm-hmm. It's in Central Asia, not the Caucasus. The Russian government came out and said these people have not been in the Caucasus for a very, very long time. And so these are some of the, for lack of a better term, facts that we know, their origins, their travels. Why did they actually do this? Does suggest a certain level of radicalization. Now, how did that radicalization take place? What were the motivating factors? Those are still really unclear.
It's really, truly confusing because, again, from monitoring all of the news services over the course of the afternoon, one doesn't see where they became radicalized. They came over to the United States several years ago and seem to have had relatively normal, at least, again, what some of the people who know them say, relatively normal times in the United States. So how exactly or where might this have gone off the rails for them?
There are a number of possibilities. Number one is that you may appear to be on the normal track to your neighbors, to your colleagues at work, your schoolmates, your relatives and friends. But deep down, you may be experiencing what most people call an identity crisis. You're not really fitting in. And mind you, this is sort of an exception to the rule of most Muslims in North America. Most Muslims in North America are very much integrated into mainstream public life. And this is sort of a contrast from what we've seen in Europe, where there is this feeling of alienation. Now, most of those people who are alienated will not go to the level of militancy. They may harbor sort of extreme radical views or may just be conservative, but they will not go down to the level of militancy. Here in North America, on our side of the Atlantic, we have thankfully not seen that kind of radicalization that we've seen elsewhere in the West. So the question is, these two people are an exception, and are we just talking two people again, or are we talking two and some more, and then how many more?
Okay, let me get you to focus on, and again, we don't know that this is the cause, but we may find out more information in the days ahead, which would point to the Russian Chechen issue as one of the causes behind this, and if it in fact is the case, then you can help us understand a little bit more about it. Those two states have been, I don't know if they've been in a technical state of war for several years, but they've certainly had their issues for several years. What's that been about?
Well, Chechnya, shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, just like other parts of the former Soviet Union, sought independence from Moscow, from what became essentially Russia, not the Soviet Union, not the USSR. It was a geopolitical piece of real estate that Russia did not want to lose.
But let me just understand this. We're seeing it right now. Chechnya was not one of the constituent republics of the former Soviet Union, was it?
It was part of it was part of what became the Russian Federation.
Part of the Russian Federation.
Yes.
So they never were an independent state, and they sought independence after the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Well, even under the Soviet Union, there was no independence. So whether you were a Central Asian Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or Azerbaijan or Armenia, these were republics, part of the Union of Soviet Socialist
Right.
Republics.
But Chechnya wasn't even that.
Chechnya wasn't even that; it was a sort of a subdivision, if you will.
Okay.
And now, but Chechnya, there was this desire to see independence. Now, and this is a majority Muslim area, and when the nationalist rebellion took place, you could see that over time it took on a religious flavoring. It didn't take on necessarily an Islamist flavoring, much less a jihadist in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But as time rolled by, and the Muslims around the world saw fellow Muslims in Chechnya, they for the first time learned that there were actually fellow Muslims who were actually seeking independence. Nobody really knew about Chechnya until then, until the war broke out in the early 90s. So there was this effort from the outside to help, just as there was help for the Bosnians in the Balkans War in 1992.
Okay, but after 9/11, did the Russians not try to recast this as this is our example of Muslim fundamentalism and we've got to deal with it?
By that time, it had already metamorphed into a very complex militant Islamist jihadist scenario, where you went from being a nationalist uprising to one that takes on a religious flavoring, going to the next level of saying, we want an Islamic state in Chechnya, and then spreading out to areas like Dagestan, which is next door. And by that time, you see people of AQ persuasion, Al-Qaeda persuasion jumping into the fray. And so it's national, it's secular national liberation to Islamist nationalism to regional Islamism to global caliphate type ideology. So by that time, by 9/11, this place had already gone through a lot of transformation.
And what's the status of the Russian Chechnyan state of war, state of unrest, call it what you want, today?
Over the years, Russia has been very successful in quelling this Islamist militancy in not just Chechnya, but throughout that North Caucasus region. And right now, these, whatever remains of what is called the Caucasus Emirate, the name of the umbrella group of Islamist militants in the region, is very weak. And so the question is, here is an entity that is pretty much contained by Russia, and it's anti-Russian. So how does that entity get linked to, anti-American Al-Qaeda sentiment? And there are all sorts of connections. It's a very fluid dynamic across the globe. People get influenced, and there's cross-pollination of ideas. But organizationally, Chechens have not, they've been part of Al-Qaeda. We've seen them in Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan. We've seen all of that. We've seen them even in, there were reports they were in Iraq back in the day as well. But we have not seen Chechens strike at the United States. So the question is, how can an entity that was just until fairly recently, until this incident, anti-Russian, all of a sudden shift gears and become anti-American?
That was actually the next question on my list here. Why would that have happened? If, again, we don't know, but if in fact the Russian Chechen state of war was part of the underpinning behind these, I was going to call them kids, but there's two guys who did this, or who are alleged to have done this. Why did anything happen in the United States?
I believe that the answer is that there is no link to the Caucasus Emirate, the main group that's fighting the Russians, or the remnants of that group that still exist in the Caucasus. I think that because they come from Chechnya originally, and mind you, they went to Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, and then there are some reports saying they even stayed in Kazakhstan and some brief stay in Turkey before coming to the United States. It's an ethnic link more so than an organizational link. So, the evidence at this stage in the investigation points to these people being self-radicalized. There is for those who follow, the terrorism world, there is a magazine called Inspire. It's published by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And it is a magazine that is geared towards this cultivating this homegrown radicalization, where you don't really need to go to an Afghanistan or somewhere else. You don't need to attend have a membership with a group and have a group-like environment where you're being indoctrinated and trained into these terrorist techniques, you can be motivated, and the intent is that you can even learn the tradecraft. Of course, the tradecraft is something that you cannot master on your own, but at least the intent of those who publish inspire. That's what they're trying to do. So we at Stratfor are thinking that perhaps these people are a reflection of that phenomenon, where you have grassroots people being self-motivated because of some other alienation with their context.
Okay, but 9/11 was about attacking American capitalism, New York, American politics, Washington. Why would you attack the Boston Marathon?
That is another good question. I mean, that is the sort of one of the things that we need to sort of unpack here. Usually, your professional terrorists will never strike where they live. We saw this,
which these guys just did.
These
allegedly.
Guys did. Yeah, from what we know, this is what they did. If you look at the World Trade Center bombing, the first one, the people who did it, they were out before anybody found out. Mm-hmm. It was later on that U.S. authorities, in conjunction with their allies around the world, were able to track them down into Pakistan. Ramzi Yusuf was arrested. But nonetheless, you have a difference between how professional terrorists operate and how these individuals operated. And so there is that clear distinction of why, in their case, it's probably because this is their reach. They cannot go anywhere else. It's ultimately a function of your resources, your supply chain, how much money you have, what is your reach. You don't want to be able to sort of make a bomb and then transport it along a long distance, because you are either going to get detected, or if you're really bad at the tradecraft, you may even blow yourself up. And so there's that. The other thing is that, well, you can transport yourself somewhere, Washington, New York, LA, and do this, but then again, you're away from your comfort zone, from where your center of operations, where you are your familiar surroundings, where you can actually do this.
So that suggests more of a lone wolf operation as opposed to something with tentacles.
Steve, the problem with lone wolf and the terminology in general is that it sort of keeps evolving. So lone wolf originally was there was this one guy who just went off the deep end and committed.
Unabomber.
Yeah, the Unabomber, the Fort Hood shooter, people like that. Here we have two people. Here we have, what is essentially a very major incident since 9/11. We've not seen people, pop off IEDs in the United States. Even the 9/11 attacks were of a qualitatively different level.
And the response was not a whole city on lockdown either.
Yeah, and
this is unprecedented.
Here, it's trying to sort of, in the case of the 9/11 bombers, they died. Mm-hmm. The 9/11 attackers, they came in with a suicide mission. Here, the other strange thing is these people are trying to escape. Mm-hmm. And so, are they jihadists? Are they not really jihadists? How much of it indoctrination are we looking at? So there are too many things that basically set them apart from what we know of the standard sort of typical jihadist behavior.
The Winter Olympics are scheduled for 2014 in Sochi, Russia. Did the security arrangements for those games just get a whole lot more complicated?
I think it did, because these games are something really big for the Russian government. Russia cannot afford to be seen as lax on security. I think even if this didn't happen, their security would have been really top right. Now that they've seen Chechens go strike at the United States, they will say, okay, do we need to do something more to secure this area, this venue? And so yes, I think that this will shape security perceptions in Russia as well.
And let me, in our last minute, just ask you about political pressure and other kinds of pressure that would be on President Obama right now. The law enforcement authorities in Boston certainly seem to make great progress from day 1 to day 2 and day 2 to day 3. What does the president do?
I think what the president has to do is essentially show that, when a thing like this happens, I mean, let me step back and take 30 seconds to explain. I mean, this is not Afghanistan. This is not Iraq. This is not Pakistan. This is a place where you do not have these kind of things. This is like one of those things that you can't even imagine happening. And we have the post 9/11 decade as proof that 9/11 was a one-off thing. So this is not a normal circumstance. So the president all of a sudden comes under a lot of pressure to show that all is well, that he is in charge, and because one of the first things that the public demands is, what are the authorities doing, whether it's local, state, federal, and the president has to personally get involved, and it comes in the backdrop of the Bush administration's, record of being very tough on terrorism, and so President Obama has to deal with this situation in that context.
So do you reproclaim the war on terror is back on?
I don't think so. I don't think that we're going to have a reproclamation of the war on terror. Hey, we're not even going into Syria. We didn't go into Libya. There is a new military doctrine that's a separate discussion that's evolving. So I don't see that happening. But what I do see happening is that this is the first bombing since 9/11, and so there is going to be a serious effort to see that is this another one-off, or is this an emerging pattern? Can we expect others to do this? Are there others out there? One of the biggest things after 9/11 is this a one-off thing? President Bush at that point in time, the pressure that he faced was that he couldn't tolerate another attack, because another attack, a follow-on attack, would show that the president and the government doesn't have things under control. We're not at that level anymore. That was a one-off thing. But President Obama needs to show, and the authorities need to show that they have the situation under control. And I think that most of the contact between the authorities and the media is all about that.
One last question, and that is, how much relief do you think there was if, in fact, these two men who are alleged to have done this did it? How much relief do you think there was that this was not obviously the work of Al-Qaeda or any other apparently Middle Eastern-inspired person?
There is relief on two ends. There is some relief on the part of the United States government, the different levels of authority, that we still have this Al-Qaeda under check. And so this is something else. It is troublesome. It is not fitting the pattern that we have been following, but nonetheless, it's not at that scale. So that's one level of relief. The other relief is sort of ironically amongst American Muslims, actually, who are dreading that, and then there was those tweets all over the place, and there were articles written that, please let it not be a Muslim. And some people are saying, please let it not be an Arab or a Pakistani or whatever, because they feel that, they just put 9/11 behind them, and now we're going backwards, and they would be the target of some new investigation and the whole thing about guilt by association and so on and so forth. So there was relief on that end as well. But nonetheless, from the point of view of the United States government, this has to be investigated very thoroughly, because this doesn't fit the pattern, and where are we headed? That's the question.
That's Kamran Bokhari, the Vice President, Middle Eastern and South Asian Affairs with Stratfor. As always, Kamran, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.